Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all today. Let me just bring up our minutes. Our agenda. But as usual, we'll be doing introductions. We'll have approval of the minutes. We also have a new board member who I'm pleased to introduce today. And so I'd like us to begin with our introductions. And first, I want to welcome you all. This is our first data subcommittee meeting of the year. The RIPA board forms, in my view, a vital function for the state. And I'm looking forward to our work this year, especially, and the progress we can make together. My name is Lily Kajabi. I'm a professor of mathematics in the Department of Mathematics, Statistics, and Data Science at Loyola Marymount University, which is in Los Angeles, an appointee of the Attorney General's office. And I'd like to invite each board member in turn to unmute, and please introduce yourself as well. Can I pass it on to Board Member Dobard?
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Kajabi. Good afternoon, everyone. John Dobard, Vice President of Policy and Programs at Catalyst, California. Happy to join you all today and get ready for the year. I will pass it to Board Member Guerrero.
Good afternoon, everyone. Andrea Guerrero from Alliance San Diego. I'm an appointee of the Senate President Pro Tem, and I will pass it to Chauncey.
Good morning. Great to see everybody. Chauncey Smith, Catalyst, California, appointee of the Attorney General. Not sure what other board members to pass it to, so I'll defer to you, Lily, or Alexander.
That's great. We have a new board member. Perhaps can I read this introduction first, and then I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself as well. But before I begin, can I ask, Captain, is it Alatorre or Alatorre?
Yeah, Alatorre. So Alatorre is fine with me, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I appreciate it. Well, let me go ahead and introduce you, and you'll have a moment to introduce yourself as well. So Captain Jose Alatorre represents the California Highway Patrol, or CHP, with more than 20 years of law enforcement experience. Captain Alatorre has held a variety of field and administrative assignments statewide, developing expertise in enforcement operations, organizational leadership, and statewide program management. Captain Alatorre is recognized for building high-performing teams, fostering collaborative partnerships, and upholding CHP's mission of providing the highest level of safety, service, and security. And with that, may I ask you to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Again, Captain Jose Alatorre, currently assigned to our field support section here at our headquarters office in Sacramento. Before that, I was a lieutenant commander of our Grass Valley area. I've worked at our academy as our tactical training lieutenant, subject matter expert for street racing sideshows and speed enforcement programs. So I'm happy to be here and happy to get to work. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Our first order of business is to review and the minutes, that is hopefully to approve the minutes from our last meeting. And so these were included in the calendar invite electronically for the meeting. I'm wondering if anyone wants to take a moment to open them up, if there were any corrections or comments. And then in a moment, I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes as well. But did anyone have any minor edits or anything else? Actually, I'm going to, oh, go ahead, yes.
I apologize, Co-Chair Kajabi. I just wanted to let the board subcommittee know that after sending the minutes and before this meeting, one of our team members had identified a couple of technical changes, technical corrections, which I can show on the screen right now to page 8 of the minutes. So you can see here on the screen that the second to last paragraph on page 8 has 3 changes that are grammar syntactical changes, the cases of people that do not consent but are searched rather than searches. The second to last sentence, point of how and when should the analysis, is 2 shoulds. There's one deletion of should there. And the consent-based searches right there. So those are very, very small changes, but I just wanted to let the subcommittee know that we did catch those and we can make those changes. And if as you say, if you want to invite a motion to approve the minutes with those changes, then I think that would be the most appropriate way to proceed.
Okay, before we do, on that page, I think there were minor typo. I think it's there's a probably when it means to say probable cause. I think also on page 8 as a friendly amendment. And then, although I don't have the page in front of me, I think there's a reference to board member Green spelled with an E at the end. And there was, let's see, it's on page 14. There's a Green without the E that could be added. So maybe we could, so I'll entertain a motion if anyone has one to approve the minutes along with these minor edits or corrections.
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
I don't know if anyone's interested in seconding that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, and then is this a roll call vote?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
I can take the roll call vote. The motion on the table to approve the September 18, 2025 stop data subcommittee minutes as amended. Co-chair Kajabi.
Aye.
Kajabi, aye. Board member Alatorre.
I'm going to abstain as I wasn't there for this meeting.
Alatorre abstain. Board member Smith.
Aye.
Smith, aye. Board member Dilbard.
Aye.
Dilbard, aye. Board member Guerrero.
Aye.
Guerrero, aye. The roll call vote is 4 ayes and 1 abstention. So that motion passes.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the other business of the meeting. And in particular, we're going to begin with updates from the DOJ on a variety of fronts. So can I invite DOJ members beginning?
And if someone wants to provide information services wants to provide that short update first, that's fine, or I'll go into my my presentation. But okay, I will start. So here we go.
So I saw one of your colleagues pop up, but Garrett, were you going ahead to start?
Oh, I was going to offer. So I think we're kind of, there was possibly going to be a short update from Research Services regarding the data dashboard. I can do my presentation first. So
Daniel Harmon here with Research Services. I can provide the quick update to the dashboard since it's rather quick. We'd like to just update the board that the dashboard is in its final stages of draft form, and we are going to begin our internal reviews for feedback and data safety and security shortly, and we're on track to release by mid-2026.
Can I ask a question? Is there an opportunity? I heard you say release. This is great. First of all, this is great to hear. There's so much progress. It's very welcome. This committee and others and the full board have really, I will appreciate. We call for a way for the public to, in a meaningful way, to really be able to access the RIPA data. I heard you say that there's an internal review, and I was wondering if there are other opportunities, either for the public or others, to weigh in, or even after it's released, if there would be opportunities to weigh in on crafting, or so we don't know what it looks like yet, or what it will display, but for input.
Yes, I mean, after it's published, we always welcome feedback from the public on things that they'd like to see or ways to improve our dashboards. So there's definitely ways that the public can weigh in once it's been released.
All right, and we'll have time as a board to also, as a committee, to discuss, so we can return to that too if others want. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Yeah, if I may, Lily, to chime in on that, I would also like a chance to review. I think a lot of the board members have a fair amount of expertise in the issues that would probably be covered in the dashboard.
Mhm.
And I think it could be helpful to the end product. So if it's possible, I think that would be great.
Yes. Yeah, we'll coordinate with Crest to see if we can how we can loop in the board.
And thank you, Daniel, for all the hard work that you've been doing to produce it. Just want to acknowledge that.
Oh, thank you.
And if there are no more questions from the subcommittee to Daniel, I'll begin my presentation. So,
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And this should be showing up, I hope. Yeah, my name is Garrett Lindsay. I'm a Deputy Attorney General in the Civil Rights Enforcement Section. I work on part of the RIPA team to process and analyze the data received by law enforcement agencies every year for the RIPA report. During this presentation, I will provide an overview of the data submitted annually by law enforcement. I will also discuss the RIPA data that relates to federal immigration efforts, which is an area that the subcommittee discussed last year. I will also present some potential topics for the Stop Data Subcommittee for the 2027 report. As always, if the committee has any questions or would like to follow up on any area, please let me know during the presentation or after. So to begin, over the years, there have been some questions about what data is collected under RIPA. An easy way to understand the data collected under RIPA is by reviewing the CJIS 2000 form. This is the standard form that all law enforcement officers effectively fill out after completing the stop, as defined in the RIPA statute and associated regulations. So if you have a question about whether law enforcement officers submit data or a particular piece of information relating to a particular data element, or whether DOJ analyzes potential racial and identity disparities within the data elements, then this might be a good form to start. The form is a good place to start to try to understand that. And one thing is, this year we made the form public facing in the appendix of the 2026 report. So I'm going to post a link to that. And if so, this is the a link to the appendix. And if you go to page 163, you'll get to Appendix H, which has this form. So I'm not going to go through the form on the slides. If you want to follow along at home, you can, or if you want to, take that form down and make a note of it so you can better understand what data we're collecting. So for context, so you see this form here. While law enforcement officers effectively use this CJIS Form 2000 to record the RIPA data, and all the stop data on the form, it is in the record. The stop will probably be recorded by law enforcement agencies and submitted some other way. So Cal DOJ hosts a web application to submit stops, and there are vendors who provide a product to submit stops. And also there's IT departments of some LEAs that might have their own system. Most LEAs use a vendor product, and those vendor products generally connect with other record management and case management products that the department is using. So while there is a paper CJIS 2000 form, typically the experience of the officer is not the paper form, but the paper form does show you what we are collecting. So to go through the form quickly, an overview of what we're collecting in the CJIS 2000 form, and effectively what we're collecting in the RIPA data set, is information about the reporting officer. So there is a reporting officer section, and this section records the identity information about the officer who conducted the stop and completed the report. It describes some of the officer's characteristics, their agency, and their assignment. Notably, Any unique identifying information of the officer is not reported in the publicly available RIPA data. There's information about the setting. This captures the context for the stop, such as the date, time, location, and the duration of the stop. It also captures how the stop began, what mode of transportation the person stopped was using, and if other law enforcement agencies were involved. Information about the person stopped is recorded in the form. This includes the officer's perception of the characteristics of the individual stopped, like perceived race or ethnicity, perceived gender, perceived sexual orientation, perceived age, perceived English fluency, whether they are perceived to have a disability, and their perceived housing status. The form records the reason for stop. This section includes the primary legal or investigative justification for the stop, like a traffic violation, reasonable suspicion, or an outstanding warrant. Actions taken during the stop is recorded. This section is a very robust section that documents what occurred during the stop, what questions were asked, what kinds of searches were conducted, and for what reason. Was there a seizure or use of force during the stop? It also captures the basis for some of those actions. And finally, there's the result of stop section. So the last part of the CJIS 2000 records the final outcome of the encounter, such as a warning, a citation, arrest, or no action. So if you're asking yourself, do we collect this? Do we know this from the RIPA data set? A good place to start to understand what we're capturing is this CJIS 2000 form. So if there's a question about can we look at something, this is the form has basically the format and tends to capture that kind of information. So that might be a good place to start if you were wondering if we know something from our data set. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. So we've been having some discussions of federal immigration efforts last year, and we've conducted some preliminary analysis as to what the RIPA data can tell us about federal immigration efforts. First, as you know, only state and local law enforcement agencies collect and submit to the RIPA data to California DOJ. Federal law enforcement agencies do not submit RIPA data to our office. However, there are some data elements that are reported by the state and local law enforcement agencies that could relate to federal immigration efforts. For example, one data element captured by RIPA is whether the stop was made in conjunction with a non-reporting agency, such as when the reporting officer is working with a joint task force with a federal agency. And this is one of the data elements that's on the CJIS 2000 form. Another required data element is relating to the result of the stop, and it asks whether the stop resulted in the reporting officer contacting the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. So when we're looking at those elements, in 2022, 2023, and 2024, officers reported that approximately 500 stops per year resulted in the reporting officer contacting DHS. However, it's not always clear how this data should be interpreted. So DHS contains a number of different departments, including Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, and the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, as well as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. The RIPA data does not differentiate between these different subparts of DHS. So if it's CBP, TSA, or ICE, that's all going to be marked as DHS. Another area of the RIPA data that could be relevant to understanding the federal immigration efforts is the narrative fields that the officers fill out when they provide information about the stop. So this is kind of a more complete description of the stop. However, it's kind of the level of detail in those narrative fields can vary. So, we're kind of dependent on the level of detail that the officer has in the narrative field, and there may be some inconsistency in how the narrative fields are completed, or what the officer believes is necessary to put into narrative field. Our Research Services Bureau conducted a preliminary analysis based primarily on the review of the narrative fields for 2018 to 2024. So we looked through the many, I think millions of stops, and they found that 2,085 stops where the officer reported contacting Customs and Border Protection in the narrative field in some way. And about 2,000 or 1,869, but we'll got about 2,000 for each of these, where the officer reported contacting the Transportation Security Administration in the narrative field. And so both of these actually, a lot of it related to air travel and things like that, like crossing the border. And so in some instances, officers described conducting detentions or issuing DOI violations at a border crossing, maybe. In other instances, officers reported in the narrative fields that the CBP contacted the LEOs for assistance related to a border crossing. California Highway Patrol, San Francisco Police Department, and LA World Airport PD. So Los Angeles has a kind of separate police department for the LAX airport. The LA World Airport PD were the law enforcement agencies where officers were most frequently reported involvement with DHS and CBP. Where the officers reported contacting TSA in the available narrative fields, it was almost universally about someone bringing something, prohibited item at a security checkpoint. That was, it was almost always related to the security checkpoints. Our preliminary analysis shows that officers use the term ICE in available narrative fields, but it does not always relate to immigration and customs enforcement. So in many instances, we see the term ICE related to weather conditions or food, or things that might appear in in the beverage. So ICE is in there a lot, but it's a lot of labor to get it nailed down. So we looked at a preliminary basis that there were less than 100 reported involvements with ICE in the 2018 to 2024 set based on the review of the narrative fields. Of these stops, the majority related to law enforcement officers pursuing warrants or conducting warrant checks, and the narratives that mentioned immigration generally did not have a strong pattern, although some might have involved someone who was involved in immigration-related violations like transporting an undocumented individual. So most of the stops were conducted by CHP, but less than 20 that involved the ICE, and then LAPD and San Diego PD were the second most common agencies to report a ICE that we identified as involving immigration and customs enforcement, and that was less than 10. ICE stopped reporting on, so there used to be a ice.gov/statistics page that could kind of tell you what operations ICE was doing in the state of California. And that data goes up to 2024, but there is no data on that starting in 2025. So there may be some third-party sources where we could get similar data, but direct data from ICE related to detentions, arrests that we can pinpoint that this is a detention or arrest in California, we're not able to get publicly directly from the federal government starting in 2025. So the subcommittee might be interested in whether there's a relationship between ICE immigration activity and other stops, but that's going to be hard to identify just based on the data sets that we have access to. Looking at the 2025 data, though, our office might be able to analyze whether an ICE action related to the 3 regions in California. So ICE has 3 areas of responsibility: San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Those kind of 3 regions that they report. And prior to 2025, you were able to kind of look at how many arrests were in those 3 regions. Broadly, kind of basically Los Angeles area was Southern California, except San Diego, Imperial, and the San Francisco was the rest of California. But any more kind of particular than that, you're going to really have a hard time coming to any kind of conclusions, even if we had the kind of the best sort of data that ICE used to produce. And so there's kind of a difficulty there, kind of matching up particular California local state law operations and connecting it to a ICE action. So with that said, I'll move to the next slide. So now we're looking at the 2027 report. And we've been thinking, of Chauncey, sorry.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. Thanks, Garrett.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, appreciate the presentation. 2 things came to mind. One is You said, starting in 2025, there's been limited access to ICE data. Is it that, do you know whether it's that they don't collect the information anymore, or they just don't make it publicly available like they used to?
So I can't really say with any specificity on that, but I do believe that the parties that are in litigations that have there's something going on where they're getting the data. So these third parties are getting data. So I believe that means it is collected. It's just not produced in the way it used to be produced on the ice.gov/statistics website.
Got it.
That's my indication. So it would be kind of hard to imagine that they're not keeping track of the number of actions they take. But
okay, so that's helpful to distinguish. So what sort of third parties are you referring to? I'm just wondering.
Yeah. So like I said, I can't, I can't, I haven't myself, I don't really know. I can't say like, oh, this is I would not say I know that this is a reliable source of this information, but there are, and I think off the top of my head, and when I looked at, let's see, there is one entity I did look at. I did see that they did appear to have information about ICE operations that they claim that they received via basically public records requests or litigation, the Deportation Data Project.
Okay.
So that would be, and their website is deportationdata.org, but that's not a California state source, and also it's through a third party that's not direct. So.
Got it. All right. Well, that's helpful to know. The main thing I was just trying to get to is, whether it might be possible for us to still obtain the information if it's being collected, even though it's just not as transparent as it used to be. It sounds like that might be possible. I just want to just put a pin in that as like a FYI, something that we can consider. Just as the idea. And then the second part or second question is, you said ICE, it sounds like you said ICE has field offices in 3 jurisdictions: San Diego, LA, and San Francisco. And that's,
so I would say that, sorry, to be clear, when they report it, they report the actions as being part of the San Francisco, Los Angeles, or San Diego reporting area.
Got it.
So I don't know the exact where they have field offices.
Okay. Yeah, and I was just wondering about like other areas like the Central Valley and things like that. How does that work?
So, and I believe that most of the Central Valley would probably be reported in the San Francisco area of responsibility.
Okay.
I think, so I think
so it's broad. It's broader than just
it's very broad.
This particular city or county. It's just like an anchor, a jurisdictional anchor, a regional anchor.
Yeah, regional anchor. And although like the San Diego area is actually pretty small because it's basically just the southern border, but then when you talk about the San Francisco region, and actually most states are actually with other states in the data. So so like I think so like most states are. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If I could jump in, Chauncey, I appreciate your interest in trying to tap this data. This data is all data that we track pretty closely. And, I think it's outside of the bounds of what we're doing at the California RIPA board, only insofar as that data collection is not under our purview. It is currently being generated from FOIA requests. There are websites that are tracking it. There are questions about the integrity of that data. But to the extent that we can see patterns and trends, we can see it in the way that they're capturing it, which is covering the whole state, but it's just based on the jurisdictions that they have. So I think we can refer to it, but I think we have a lot of work to do as the California RIPA board to look into our own data. I know that the one data point that we do have that relates to the DHS agencies is the pass off data. Like when are local law enforcement or state law enforcement passing people off? That's a data point we've been capturing for a number of years. There are limited exceptions for when that can happen. And so that's a data point that we're able to cross-check against state required data through the Truth Act, which requires a regional reporting by county sheriffs to the community about that pass off data. So we can cross-check what they're telling everyone that they're doing and making sure that they're within the allowed exceptions. My 2 cents.
Thank you very much
Andrew.
for that. So, Garrett, did you want to go ahead? This is very helpful.
Yeah, no, I
Garrett.
didn't want to interrupt the discussion that's in we're having a decision, but we can get to discussion after the break too, more in depth on this. But thank you for the context on that, Andrea. Yeah, so looking to the 2027 report, we've identified a number of potential topics for the subcommittee to consider. But these are just, these are suggestions, I guess. So we appreciate the guidance and the direction that the subcommittee can provide so that we can present research and analysis that is the most responsive to the interests of the subcommittee and the board generally. One potential topic for the 27 report is to expand on the slide I just presented and analyze the available RIPA data that may be related to federal immigration enforcement actions, and then also bring in the 2025 data. So that what I reported on in the previous slide, that just is going up to the 2024. When we publish, we'll have 2025. The subcommittee can also expand on the analysis conducted in the 26 report relating to different modes of transportation and whether there are racial and identity disparities that can be significant when we kind of dial in on that area. So in particular, the subcommittee can more clearly distinguish the calls for service from officer-initiated stops on transportation types to better understand the difference in transportation policing. So last time when we published the transportation numbers, we didn't disambiguate between the officer-initiated and the calls for service on that. And one difference here would be to consider that like if you knock on someone's door, that ends up, I think, in the RIPA data as a pedestrian stop. So but that would be a call for service pedestrian stop. So maybe there's a reason there to distinguish there. The subcommittee might also want to understand how differences in the number of persons stopped in a vehicle stop might impact the stop and the differences in policing that come from that. So just consider that people may be carpooling more or less depending on, on things relating to their background. I think that there's information on that. And I believe that it's not, I think it's possible for there to be differences in related to how much for passengers, adult passengers specifically, when they approach a vehicle. Research services looked at the feasibility of this type of analysis, and they've let us know that it's possible. However, that subcommittee should know that when they further divide data, there may be some really small groups in any of these divisions. So just that as we kind of look narrower and narrower, there may be not enough data to really make a conclusion. We could also look at conducting longitudinal analysis of the data that we've received over the last 4 years. So now we have a full set of data from all reporting agencies for the last 4 years, from 2022 to 2025. So we could look at the data in its entirety over those 4 years. This might be helpful for the subcommittee to assess trends or identify particular types of reform to see if there was an impact. This type of analysis does come with some caveats. We shouldn't ignore the possibility that the trends may be because that the officers are facing different circumstances over time as well. So, for example, the subcommittee might be interested in looking at consent search rates and search discovery rates to look into different search practices and disparities to see if there's a trend there. Search discovery rate disparities are also useful to understand how probable cause is ascertained. So is there kind of are we seeing differences there? There's differences in the call for service or officer initiated stops over time, the proportion of stops that are reported as call for service or officer initiated. So that can maybe indicate a change in policing towards more or less discretion. We might also be looking at particular kinds of stops on that. Are we seeing more loitering stops, which are seen sometimes as pretextual? Are we seeing more or less of those? Are we seeing more or less of the mental health related stops? Maybe is that impacting other behavior in the stops? And have we seen a rise in that? Have we seen a decrease in that? And are we seeing more, less, or different kinds of use of force over the 4 years? So when we look at the 4 years, that may not be a meaningful amount to do any sort of prediction. And then we also may want to consider like what the time periods we're looking at here. Are we looking at here by years? Are we looking at here by quarters? That's also something else to consider when we look at that. Looking at these trends, we would probably want to narrow down the list of the variables to examine over time, and maybe examine them based on a concrete research question. And it is possible that the changes over time are actually very small. And it's actually very consistent over the past of the 4 years. So those are, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And then if not, I think we have a break after this, and then the subcommittee will go into discussion on the topics for next year's report.
Thank you very much. I want to invite, first of all, while we have DOJ literally on screen, did those last slides, are there any questions that we have or particular comments anyone wanted to make? And then we'll move into a broader discussion about what we'd like to focus on for this year's report. Can I pause for a moment? Did anyone have additional comments? And forgive me while I'm, if I don't see your hand up, if you use the Teams raise hand function, also feel free, of course, to unmute or chime in. But Board Member Dobard, I saw your hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Garrett, thank you for the presentation and overview. I'm interested in the longitudinal analysis, and I heard you say that it's possible to do that with 4 years of data. I'm just curious, is it possible to go back further and also acknowledge data limitations? Is there any possibility of that?
I mean, it's possible. We would kind of have to say, well, first, there's kind of different data collected over time. So the challenges with that kind of get more and more as you expand out, but also there's been different ways of collection. So we can't really make a conclusion that we can't really say that there's been a kind of a statewide change when we're not including all the local and state entities. So we get some more and more limitations when we go prior to 2022, just because we're no longer collecting all the state and local agencies. So it's kind of a different sample.
Got it. So it's possible. But there are just a lot of complications.
It gets a lot more complicated quickly. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
So can I ask, so I'm hearing within that some agencies like CHP, LAPD that started reporting in the very first years, and then each year as there was a larger wave of agencies participating in the RIPA data collection. So for some of those agencies, maybe this is what you were getting at, Reverend Dubar, we could go back further. And then Garrett, you were just emphasizing that statewide, it's the most recent years that are representative of the entire state.
Yeah, and also, like I said, I think that there's been changes in regulations as well, and in terms of what we're collecting, in terms of how things are categorized. So there also gets to be maybe we're not actually able to compare it. You get to have more and more challenges of comparing period to period as you expand out as well. So there's also something else to consider, and so maybe based on that's like a research question specific issue, but based on the research question, that's also something that there'd have to be some analysis of like, oh, can we actually go and compare the data we're collecting from the first year of RIPA to the last year?
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess also then we'll add into the mix when the pandemic was in swing, there were dramatic changes and things across the state in every aspect of our lives. But that, I guess, if we were able to look at older data, it would sort of almost be like a before and then hop and then look at the more recent. But I agree. I just want to emphasize, Board Member Dobard, also I think a longitudinal analysis. We want to see if there are jurisdictions that have, when they make policy changes, you can see that reflected in the stops. And so this would be very valuable to do. And I would love to see that as a focus of this of this year. I also see Board Member Smith. I see your hand. Oh, Board Member Dubard, was that your comment for now, or we can come back to? Can I pass on to Board Member Smith?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, Board Member Smith. Chauncey, would you like to?
Yes.
Weigh in?
Because the data on referrals to DHS is somewhat limited in terms of it sounds like based on your preliminary review, I'm wondering whether it could also be helpful to look at perceived English fluency or limited English ability as one of the categories of information that's collected during the stop as a proxy, alone or in combination with race or ethnicity, as a way to kind of get a better understanding of whether there could be some bias related to immigrant communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty there is just that it's, I mean, there is some connection there, but it's just, I mean, yeah, that would be, I think our policy section is going to be looking at limited English proficiency as well as some issues related to that. But I think it's really not, it's pretty, I think the connection there isn't always going to be super direct, because people can have be have limited English proficiency and they have no immigration involvement, or they can speak fluent English and they have different immigration status. So
yeah, I think it's something we should consider, and in doing so, we could provide some form of qualification, right? It's not even when it comes to race or ethnicity, right? It's based on officer perception. So I think there's always some degree of potential inaccuracy based on what officers perceive and then the actuality of the situation. But since given the data set that we have, I'm just thinking about different creative ways that we could potentially try to get towards using data in a way that sheds some degree of light on the main problem. So I think that's just one thing we should consider. And then if we do choose to go that route, we could provide some description in the methods, right? It's imperfect, but it's a way to kind of get at the main thing.
Oh yeah, and if people from Research Services Bureau want to comment, you're welcome to also. But I think I think there's definitely something to consider there. But like I said, I think that yeah, I mean, it's just not, it's speaking of someone who has limited English proficiency doesn't necessarily going to mean that there's an immigration involvement. So I think it's a hard question. It's there's a limited ability there to look into that. Maybe other folks on the board or elsewhere have opinions on that. But I mean, it's definitely something we can explore.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be interested in seeing some content on that if it's possible.
Board Member Guerrero, I couldn't tell if you were leaning in to make a comment or.
Yeah, this issue of data collection is a ripe one, and there have been efforts at the federal level to replicate the RIPA law so that we can get some federal data going. But with the data that we have available to us, I think it's limited, but we should make use of it. And that's the data around the contact between agencies. And then we had delved into the duty to intervene last year, and So I think taking a look at that is important. And then I guess I wanted to ask, there are available data sets that DOJ captures, and sometimes we refer loosely to them, but I'm wondering what the array of DOJ data is. So not federal data, not stop data, but other DOJ data that might help us understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean that's something that maybe a future topic we could look at exploring. Because I do know we collect other data sets just to see if maybe there's something in the other data sets that might relate. But, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, because I guess we have data with, like, for example, like URSA's data that's about use of force and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, and this is really more for the policy team, but the state protections from California law enforcement involvement have this huge carve out for task forces, joint task forces. And so I think like an understanding of how many joint task forces there are, and that's something that's supposed to be reported through the Truth Act forums, state mandated Truth Act forums, but the information we get out of those is wildly different from what we get out of Public Records Act requests. So I don't know if DOJ tracks joint task forces, but that's not stop data, but that's data on the number and location of joint task forces, because they are such a large carve out of state protections. Would be good to know.
Can I ask, Board Member Guerrero, you had talked about, you raised the duty to intervene, and I was really moved by last year's meeting, and it was very informative when we talked about immigration actions and California. And I was wondering if, and maybe it's part of the policy subcommittee, and I know that will be meeting later this week, but maybe it's here too, is there, did you have more specific comments or ideas or suggestions for how we could focus on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we had that meeting on duty to intervene, the nation was just beginning to understand that local police have a role to play. And since that time, we've seen instances of local police intervention, recording, attempts at prosecution and all of that. And so, we might give thought to how data collection could inform that work, or how policy research could inform that work. I also know, and this will be for policy, but there's legislation moving at the state level to strengthen accountability measures, and we can talk about that, and strengthen accountability measures around use of force by federal agents, and that has to do with duty to intervene, duty to investigate, and duty to prosecute.
So yeah, so in particular, and I heard you mention in particular use of force, and maybe that's an inroad, that an opening then for this report in general, but also for this committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, I think we have to think out of the box a little bit, as Chauncey has been urging us to do, to really think about how we can get at meaningful data that can help inform policymaking and community protection. And so, and also like in policy, just providing guidance, more guidance. We didn't lay it out other than that special meeting we had, but guidance around duty to intervene and what that looks like. So, for example, we know that that local law enforcement agencies are creating incident reports when they get calls around federal actions, and so we can think about whether that is whether we should be providing any guidance, or we should be drawing from those to look at best practices, or because that is a form of data collection that local law enforcement is doing that's outside of the stop data. It's more qualitative in nature, but they are generating incident reports, and I don't know if there's any easy way to capture all those incident reports related to federal immigration actions, but they're a wealth of information one by one, and would be more so if they could somehow be aggregated.
Mm. Yeah, I think it would be powerful if there was a space for this. I don't know about this committee and the board, but powerful work to be done, and to support this, to really enhance community safety by supporting this duty to intervene. And yeah, it's very complicated. But so this is something that I would love to see us make progress on, even though I'm not sure exactly the best entry point. That said, also, if there are other issues that people think are policy intertwined, this committee, the subcommittees, I think, always in service to the other subcommittees, and so I know other ideas will emerge in the later meetings too. I heard, for example, English proficiency as a point of focus, but if there are committee members here who had ideas they were thinking about raising, if you're on the policy subcommittee also and you were thinking about raising there, but you wanted to put into the mix here, just so we're all thinking about these, I invite anyone. God, yes, please go ahead. Andrea,
yes.
Sorry, Andrea, go ahead. I was looking at you, but you can't tell.
Yeah, that's okay. I saw you, but maybe other people saw you. Two areas that could be of interest to us, and one is, some longitudinal analysis of has anything changed over 10 years? Because we'll be hitting 10 years of data. In terms of, whatever that is. So I look closely at the consent search data, right? And the consent search data has been changing over time in certain agencies, and that has to do often with consent decrees or, litigation. But just maybe getting a handle on what things have changed or not changed. And that could even be anecdotal, or it could be in the aggregate. We know overall, like, the instances of disparities are consistent year over year, but if we could identify if DOJ could identify where there have been changes for better or worse across the data that we collect over 10 years, like if there's a variance of more than blah, that would be meaningful. And Lily, maybe you have an idea of what meaningful would mean. That would be really good for us to see and understand. The other thought is around homelessness. That capturing the status of the housing status of somebody is new to us, and going a little bit deeper to understand what that data is telling us would be great, because it's pretty alarming.
Thank you. And as I'm sitting here, I'm hoping, I'm assuming folks at DOJ are kind of taking in these different strands. Thank you so much. Are there other board members who want to add to this or expand on other ideas?
Yeah, I'd like to add to this and also just maybe elaborate a little bit on what I mentioned earlier about the longitudinal data, longitudinal analysis. I want to elaborate or add to what Board Member Guerrero mentioned. I think it's important to have that analysis at this time, in part because of what Board Member Guerrero just mentioned. So this will be the 10th report. I think that is a good opportunity to look back. It is unfortunate that we face some of the data limitations we have, but nevertheless, I think it's important to have that as part of the 10th report that will be out. Another reason I think it's important is that, as Board Member Guerrero mentioned, if for us and others who may follow the data, we know that there's consistency. But for folks who are not following it closely, that's not necessarily the case. So having at least one report that can talk about that to some degree, I think is useful for the public. So that folks don't have to necessarily go back to every single report and figure that out for themselves.
Thank you very much for that perspective. I think if I can chime in too, I wanted to add to this idea of the longitudinal analysis. It might be because there are many things that haven't changed, and it's very frustrating. There are also maybe things that have changed, and it would be nice to highlight those. And Garrett, in the many categories you had, I hope, yes, there's always a strong focus on consent, because that's a place where policy really can be set by agencies, and how much consent, this idea of consent, is used or not. We've seen agencies change in their emphasis, and so it'd be nice to see if that's captured in the data. But also mental health related stops was something on your list, and I'm remembering even years ago we had a chance as a full board to hear from some communities where the local law enforcement was aligning, for example, with a social worker or others, and depending on the nature of a call that was coming in, it would affect who was sent out. And it would be great to find, even if there were smaller communities. So it may not be, I guess what I want to say is there might be something that's not captured in statewide level, because there's so many stops statewide, but actually there might be smaller communities where you can actually see the impact of a policy. And so the longitudinal analysis might not necessarily be done in a comprehensive way for every question or type of action. It might be that also it's valuable to find some smaller jurisdictions that have promoted a particular policy, and then look to see specifically what's happened there. And it won't be seen on the state. It won't be captured in the full aggregate. Garrett, I saw you nodding. Does that?
Yeah, I mean, that's also still why we do want to do the full longitudinal analysis too, because you need the comparison.
Yeah.
Because did the community that adopted the change, did they, you might see a change, but was the change divergent from the rest of the state, or was it in line with the rest of the state? That's also an interesting kind of question to think about as well. I think there's a difficulty in kind of identifying what changes are actually implemented. What was the effort done with full fidelity? Was there or was there like an announcement and then they just kind of silently rolled it back? Those are it does make it kind of hard to look into it, but I think that is one of the strengths of the longitudinal analysis, is that we can see both was there a change, and then also how did that change look like compared to the rest of the state, and has that been like a lasting impact as well?
And my hope is there's a great research team at DOJ that'll be a combination of looking at the data, but also being able to step back and then maybe looking at policies from specific agencies and seeing how those interplay in all the ways that you said. Maybe there's an impact, maybe for various reasons it didn't affect things, but to be able to dig deeper that way, even if it's not in a systematic every single jurisdiction, the state, maybe given the statewide look, then there are particular agencies where we can dive more deeply. So I guess what I'm saying is really being able to ideally highlight, are there agencies where we can measure the impact of a policy change? And if not, of course, that's troubling too. That's a key part of the report. But are there some practices we can point to now that would be captured exactly by doing more longitudinal analysis? I also, here's a note to myself, so I'm going to circle back to it. I know I already said it earlier, that if there are areas that would intertwine with the policy subcommittee, this is a place to put it into the next two.
Yeah, and just on that point, we're meeting, subcommittee's meeting later this week, and this has already been mentioned, so this is just affirming that the data, so if we proceed with the longitudinal analysis, it should absolutely be paired and complemented with some discussion, analysis of what policies have been, adopted over these years, what have shown promise, what have not gone the way we wish they would have gone. So I can see those being complementary, and being an important major focus for this upcoming report. But obviously need to talk about that with the policy subcommittee.
I also, going back to the slides, I appreciated the idea of separating out calls for service and officer initiated stops. And I think we've even heard from folks in law enforcement on the board before who've wanted to highlight that as well. So I appreciate that idea. Everything else that was listed there, especially use of force, also looking at loitering stop rates and so on. There was nothing under your hit list, Garrett, longitudinal analysis that I don't want to say. I know not everything can be a priority all the time, but they all looked like valuable avenues to explore. So I don't know if you were coming with this list originally thinking, let's narrow it down, but I think we really want that. It looked very promising on every front.
Yeah, and I think one thing just kind of started on this also is like, do we think it would be, understanding that there's going to be seasonality in the data? Do we want to look at it? Do we want to look at it year by year, or do we want to maybe accepting that we'll see some seasonality? Do we want to try to also maybe look at it with little finer points that also might help us kind of with how we present the policies information as well, because the policies, typically aren't going to start January 1. Well, maybe they will in some cases, but that's another way to also is something that this committee can discuss, is how to present this longitudinal analysis. Do we want to look at it quarterly, monthly, or maybe different ways to present the information to the public is something to consider as well, because you have to explain the seasonality, because I'm sure there's significant seasonality here, but you can kind of visually observe maybe some trends past the seasonality.
So I don't know what story the data will tell, but my gut is that the research team, when it actually goes to look at particular trends, will also, it may become apparent that there's a good basis for dividing up the time periods in a certain way, so that they aren't arbitrary. I would say years are arbitrary, but you were just laying out reasons, like a policy might not be rolled out on January 1st. And so, although it complicates the first pass through and trying to look at some of these, I think it would be valuable to not think of it only as annual data. There's also this big challenge lurking behind, which you already raised earlier, that what was collected in the first years isn't the same as what's being collected now. But that doesn't mean it's not what everyone used to say, they're not apples and donkeys. They're apples and pretty close oranges.
Yeah.
So it's worth a comparison.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is more like that there needs to be an asterisk kind of realm, but I won't speak for that because the challenges won't become apparent really until we really try to dial in, I think, on some of these.
Can I ask others to rewinding a little bit on that slide? Garrett, you'd raise.
Yeah, I can present it too if you want. If
Transportation analysis.
Yeah.
Or whether you literally post or not. So there was the idea of looking in particular to see how not only how driver and pedestrian and cyclist stops might be different. Suppose we can now immediately disaggregate the way the data is collected now, but also you had said type of transportation and you said number of people in vehicle. Did you either want to say a little bit more about that, or did that catch the ear of any other?
Oh yeah, sorry. I think there was also maybe an idea that we could. So previously we have done, and prior to collecting that information, we did an analysis that tried to disambiguate on pedestrians and bicyclists based on like the penal code charges. I think that was in the 2023 report, and that helped us kind of understand maybe categories. One thing that's also possible is that right now our bus stops, like a stop on the bus is considered a pedestrian stop. One thing we might want to look at is there are a few penal code stops that are really only public transportation stops. In particular, there's like a fare dodging charge, and I think there's also maybe a probably less frequently charged, but I think there's a charge for like something like possessing a weapon on public transportation. So maybe that also might be something else to look into, the transportation aspect of expanding how the data we have on transportation to also look at that. But yeah, I think also, there's different commuter patterns that are, correlated with race, at least on the number of passengers in the car. So that might be something that we also want to think about, how the ways that there's different approaches when there's more people in the car, does that also have downstream effects on stop outcomes, or even decisions to make a stop.
Yes, thank you, Garrett. I think looking into that specific topic would be really helpful. I've been working in partnership with organizations that have a significant interest in the issue of racial disparities and stops for people who are riding public transportation. And as you mentioned, fare evasion is one of the main ways that bubbles up in the data. So I think if it's possible, that would be extremely helpful to some people in the field that are interested in the topic, and looking at how racial profiling plays out in different parts of transportation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's topic. Sorry, but yeah, that'll definitely. I think we'll start getting the wheels turned on looking at that.
And maybe can I add to that something that's come up in past years, and it's been somewhat looked at, although not always comprehensively, but the idea of picking a particular violation code and then tracing through how that impacts folks. As an example, let's say an example with cars. Some municipalities raise the idea, maybe if someone has expired registration, maybe that's not what we want law enforcement spending most of its time on. Could we have that, I don't know, enforced or encourage people or find ways for people to keep registration current that don't end up getting bogged down in law enforcement? And I don't remember offhand if there's some communities in California who've decided, okay, it's not a public safety issue. Maybe that's not the basis we want for a stop. It would be interesting to see if this is getting back to the longitudinal analysis. Is there a way to see if particular violations are handled differently now by any municipalities? Maybe I'm going to see if I could find either some news stories or other things related to, is there a particular city or agency in California who's said they're considering handling some violation in a different way, and then we can see if that played out. So I apologize, I don't have one at my fingertips, but.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
San Francisco is one jurisdiction that has made significant movement on stops based on administrative issues like registration, paperwork stuff, and also very minor equipment issues. So if you're looking at examples or looking for examples, that's one to consider that may be helpful. It's still a work in progress in Los Angeles, where a lot of my work is, but that might be another to look at.
I think Berkeley PD recently did the same.
Thank you for that. And there have been comments in the past, or even rhetoric in the committee meetings about about public safety, and if that's the overriding goal, then having these administrative violations handled differently is a very productive part of what can be done. So I heard Berkeley, San Francisco, and maybe some movement in LA, but it would be of interest to see if that's already measurable. And I think I had mentioned, I feel like Berkeley might have been the municipality I had read about doing, but I just don't remember when, or if it was more a proposal or if it was something they implemented. But the data will tell us the story. Other comments or suggestions from board members? And oh, I'm sorry, I want to apologize. We were supposed to have a break originally, and we just steamed forward. And I'd like to propose that we might just continue in this way. But I guess I want to put out there, is there anyone who would like us to take a 5-minute break? We didn't. We blew right past it.
And just to make a pitch, I know that the subcommittee's time is very valuable, but just to ensure that those who are in need of some accommodations, just a short 5-minute break would be really helpful for those individuals who are following along. And I understand it extends it just a little bit, but
was that a request for a? Was that a request that was saying, yeah, it's a good idea. We built the break in. We should do it. Is that what I was hearing? Yeah, that's fine.
If we could, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. So in that case, but we're going to come back to public comment as well. It's a vital part of our meeting. So I'm going to ask everyone, if we take a 5-minute break now, we're going to do it 5 on the dot. Let's go for 5 on the dot. So by my clock, we'd be back at 3:34. Can we do it? Okay. And my apologies for that. I did not mean to go by that. Thank you very much.
Just a reminder for board members who are coming back online after our break, if you could turn your camera on so we can reestablish quorum, that would be great. And I do see a couple of folks.
As we may be waiting for one more board member to return, I just want to thank everyone for rolling with our mini marathon, and then also thank you for coming back so quickly. And that wasn't my intention to keep anyone trapped here, so I appreciate everyone's flexibility. Thank you. And although we're not quite meeting at the moment, those who are waiting could be thinking about whether they have any comments they wanted to share as board members, and then we'll pivot to public. Okay, by my count, we have a quorum with the board members, and so thank you again, everyone. Welcome back. I'd like to ask board members if they feel like the discussion we've had captures where we want to head this year, and in particular, if there was anyone who had a suggestion, idea, concern that they wanted to raise. This is our first meeting of the year, but we want to get off to a strong start, and then so any additional thoughts? Comments? I don't see anyone indicating, so I'd like us to move now to a particularly important part of our meeting, which is public comment. I'm going to ask those who'd like to make a comment, if they're able to try to raise their hand within the Teams app, and we'll move from northern to southern California. And as a reminder, I want to say, first of all, as a board member, I really take in the comments during this portion. We don't respond as a board, but we're very interested in hearing. So with that in mind, is there anyone from Northern California who would like to start us off? I'm going to see if I can observe if anyone's raising a hand in the Teams app. And if there's anyone from Northern California who would like to unmute, and then soon we'll move to Central and then Southern. I don't see anyone. Can I ask if there's anyone from Central California there who had wanted to make public comment? And then finally, can I ask those from Southern California to either, if you're able to indicate raising a hand. And so let me ask you to go ahead. I see a hand from Southern California.
Hello. I'd like to be known as the Jamaican. Some people know me by name, and even though I try to travel incognito, I see that despite my having said that in previous meetings, the board, the reports, the minutes of the reports identify me by name and where I'm from. I'd rather not see that. It feels a little bit like doxing. If I ask or refuse not to give my location or my name, it should not appear in in the minutes of a report. So that's a reasonable thing to ask. I continue to be disappointed by much of the discussion I hear as to what purports to be factual with respect to RIPA data. I attended the meetings that led up to the adoption of the reporting rules. I attended most RIPA meetings ever since. And we continue to have discussions that speak of what data is and what data isn't. Homelessness. Homelessness was at the core of discussions onto what needed to be collected, and it was led by the Los Angeles Police Department, who now have problems with homelessness and the capture of homeless data. So let us not speak as though it is something de novo. We've always had it. We've always had the ability to speak intelligently about the numbers. I give you an example. San Diego, if you look at 2024 data, you will use the unhoused flag to identify about 13,500 perceived unhoused people. However, if you use the narrative fields together with what they were charged with, how they were cited, how they were arrested, you will find a number of other records, perhaps 20% more. People were camping in the riverbed. People were camping on sidewalks. Many of those are not captured in the homeless unhoused flag. So let us be honest about this. I believe the first time that I looked at it in detail, that there are about 1.2 million people who can be perceived as being unhoused since 2018. In San Diego alone, the number is in triple digits, and we have representation for every year. With respect to the pretext flag, LAPD, their data is robust and should be respected. With respect to San Francisco, that data is not available except perhaps to people who have connections. I have no connections, so I have not been able to get it. Perhaps you can help me get it. Finally, getting data. People like me are irritants to the CJIS people at the DOJ. I believe I have 4 or 5 CPRA requests for data that I have yet to get. Many of them are well overdue. So perhaps doctors should heal themselves. I don't remember the exact quotation, but we should not be speaking about transparency when we don't practice it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there others from Southern California, or indeed anywhere in the state, who want to add comments at this time? I don't see any other hands up, and I haven't heard anyone mute. So I think that concludes our public comments. And so then we're moving to next steps. I realized there was one item that I didn't raise earlier, what came up in the presentation, but I just want to circle back to data dashboard. I just want to say it's very welcome to hear there's significant movement on that. That's something that the board has called for strongly in the past, and I really appreciate all those who are working on that. As we're looking to next steps, although we're focused on this committee, I just want to comment. It came up that later this week, I believe on Thursday, there is the policy subcommittee meeting. Other subcommittees are meeting, but I'm wondering if anyone from DOJ can remind us of when the next full board meeting is.
I'd be happy to, and thank you so much, Co-Chair Kajabi. So yes, you are correct that the next subcommittee meeting is the meeting of the policy subcommittee. That is this Thursday, March 19, from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. We also have the accountability and civilian complaints subcommittee meeting next Tuesday, March 24, from 2 to 4 p.m. And the full board meeting has been calendared, for April 23. That's a Thursday, April 23, from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Thank you very much for that. So I really appreciate the suggestions that were made, the comments, the many strands, the focus that make you parts of focus of this year's report. I don't know if anyone else has, as we've been in our last minutes here, if anyone has anything additional they want to add. I'm really looking forward to that. Very important things are highlighted, including, as Board Member DeBar noted, we're coming up on 10 years. And so the idea of a longitudinal focus, I think, is really critical. And I especially appreciate the specific themes that were raised. So thank you all. Thanks to folks at DOJ as well. I know it's a heavy lift from all the work that law enforcement does collecting the data, and then through to the research questions that are worked on this year. And I truly appreciate everyone's efforts. And with that, I think we might be ready to conclude a little early today. Any objection? Chauncey, was that in a wave or an objection? I think it was a wave.
Yeah, I forget. Do we have to go through a formal adjournment process? I was waving goodbye, but
I don't think we have to. I think we can
all right.
adjourn, but hearing no objections, we're happily adjourning. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.